Well, hi there, folks, and welcome to The Breakdown with Dara Star Tucker. I'm so glad to be with you today to talk about the issues that matter. I'm here with you every Sunday night at 7 p.m. with a follow-up encore episode on Monday mornings at 5:30. If you've been joining me on a weekly basis, I want to thank you. I'm so glad to have you along for the ride. You can find me online at the KJLH Instagram page. That's Radio Free KJLH on Instagram, or you can find me on my personal page on Instagram at Dara Tucker B. You can find me everywhere else on socials at Dara Star Tucker. That's Dara with one R and Star with two. Today, I'm really happy to present you with part 2 of a 3-part conversation with a mutual of mine named Garrison Hayes. He is an author, he is a speaker, he's a former pastor, and he is a social media content creator. He's a reporter as well. Garrison wears a lot of hats, and we share a lot in common. This is a sprawling conversation about the relationship of the Black community to the Christian church. So Garrison and I are sharing a lot of our personal journeys around the issue of faith. We have both gone through our own process of what is now known as deconstruction, and we're sharing our stories with you with the knowledge that a lot of people may be able to identify with this journey of faith that Garrison and I have taken. Garrison has landed in a unique place considering his background, and I've landed where I've landed considering my background. Everyone has a unique story and a unique journey with faith, but we are grappling with some of these questions today, and we're bringing you along for the ride. I'm really interested to know what you all get out of this conversation. Join me on the KJLH Instagram page or on my personal Instagram. I would love to hear your feedback about this series of episodes. If you want to find Garrison, he makes some incredible informational and educational content online on all platforms. You can find him at Garrison Hayes everywhere. He's on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. Find Garrison, seek him out, and learn more about his specific point of view. Now, I want to let you know before we get into part 2 of this conversation with Garrison, I will be at South Jazz Kitchen in Philly. If you are going to be anywhere near that area, or if you have family or friends in the area, let them know that they can hear me perform live. I'm a jazz singer, so I will be performing live at South Jazz Kitchen in Philadelphia on the 21st of July. It looks like the tickets are about to go on sale on their website. When they do go on sale, you all will be the first to know. But if you're anywhere near Philly on the 21st of July, I would love to meet you in person. So without further ado, I'm going to get you over to this conversation between me and Garrison Hayes. I think you're really going to enjoy this one. This is part 2 of our 3-part conversation about Christianity and the Black community. Here it is.
I'm the president of our Black Christian Union on campus, and then eventually president of our student association. And so there is this kind of you are that. And I think there was this real optimism present. I mean, people were going so far as to say that we were living in a post-racial America.
Right.
And there's this real optimism that things were changing and different. And so I can tell you that was certainly at the core of a lot of that, that sentiment that I think people may have perceived from me personally. And it was my experience at the predominantly white institution that began to radicalize me and make me more pro-Black, precisely because I saw that the only thing that I would ever be was that somewhat articulate monkey over there, right? Like when it really came down to it, I was called names. I experienced racism from the administration. We had events on campus that were shut down because they were too Black, quotes. There were church services that we tried to have where they would forbid us from having certain instruments, all kinds of conservative Christian white supremacy. And so I experienced those things. And what really sent me kind of over the edge was I was having a conversation with a person who worked in our campus ministries department when I was a chaplain. I was a chaplain at the university after I graduated. And this was 2014 or so. So Michael Brown had been killed in Ferguson, and it was going up. Black Lives Matter. People were upset for all the right reasons. A life was lost needlessly. And I remember someone, a student missions person, coming to me and saying, "Why? What more do you all want? You
Mm,
got a black president." And I thought
mm,
to like this was her response to seeing people upset because of the loss of life. Now, this is a
mhm,
person who is outspokenly pro-life and anti-abortion, right?
mhm,
But when the life of this black man is taken and people are in the streets and they are protesting, the response is like, you all should just be happy. Like it doesn't matter that this person's body laid in the street for hours.
mhm,
It doesn't matter that they're dead. You should be happy that you got a black president. That was
mhm,
one of the moments where it was like, "Oh, there is nothing we can do
mhm,
to actually be seen as the fully human, complex, dynamic individuals that I thought you all saw us as when you elected a black president." He
mhm,
was an exception.
mm.
And the rule still exists for those of us living
Yeah.
everyday lives on the throughout the country. And so I say that to say that like my experience is what radicalized me over time, and what they're getting is Garrison on the other side of that. And I think the same is true for a lot of Gen Xers. I think about my mom's experience going through life. I think absolutely post civil rights, there's this kind of distinct history of people feeling somewhat optimistic. Black people are let into the middle class more or less over the course of a decade, right? They are invited into the middle class. But many Gen Xers are people who graduated from high school in the 80s. And you have to kind of understand that the war on drugs and this switch, this make America great again during the Reagan era,
Mhm,
is a real switch in that feeling of optimism. And then going into the 90s, you're seeing police brutality, LA, Rodney King, like you're going into this time that becomes a bit radicalizing, that like, wait a minute, all of the things I thought we were pushing toward, all of the ways in which I thought that we were making progress, some of those things are slowing down significantly or maybe never existed for a large section of
mhm,
our community. And I think it's important to recognize that the longer, for many people, the longer you live in this country, the more you're able to see them, the more mature you get, the more you are able to see the ways in which it's kind of this saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
yeah. Well, you mentioned that you were a chaplain,
It
and
was.
I have seen video of you. As a matter of fact, probably early on when I was following you, I looked you up. I was like, okay, what's this guy's history and what has he done? And then I see all of this old video of you with very little hair, looking even skinnier than you are now. Oh, baby Garrison preaching.
Yeah.
And I was shocked. I was like, what? What? This dude's a preacher and or was a preacher. And you've told little tidbits of your story here and there. You mentioned that your father, he was not a minister necessarily, but he was like an elder, did you say, in the church?
Yep, that's right.
And one of the videos that really jumped out at me early on, it might have actually been the first TikTok video that I saw of yours. The reason that I followed you
Mm,
was, or very, very soon thereafter, was a video of you talking about your father
mm.
and his experience with the church. Your father passed away. Did you say it was 2021?
Yep, September
Okay.
2021. Yep.
And you talked about the reasons that that he passed away. So can you tell me some about that, Garrison? I don't want to tell your story for you because I kind of, I'm trying to get into this conversation that I said that we were going to have about Black people in the church, and I feel like this is
Yeah,
this is maybe a good segue into that.
that's
Please
right.
talk to me more about your dad. And when you showed the picture of your dad, it was, I just remember this so vividly because it jumped out at me. He reminded me so much of my own father,
Mm,
who was a minister. And it was just like, oh, daddy. It just was that
yeah.
feeling of like, yes, I just felt his humanity and the way that you spoke about him. There was so much love and there was so much compassion and there was so much mercy there in how you spoke about his experience and the reason for him passing away. So can you talk some about that, please, if you would, Garrison?
My dad died from COVID 2 weeks ago today. And watching his month-long battle with the disease was the most painful thing I've ever had to endure. And one of the most upsetting things about it is that it was totally unnecessary. You see, he was fed conspiracies and lies from the very beginning of the pandemic. Stuff about 5G signals and plandemics, and a lot of those conspiracies carried over once the vaccine became available. If people are given bad information, false data from trusted sources like your pastor, your friends, your family, those people will make bad decisions just based off of that bad information, and the consequences are immense. My dad was a beautiful, brilliant giant of a man who should still be here today, but he believed the people that he trusted. Those people turned out to be false teachers, and he paid the price with his life. Yeah. I miss my dad a lot. And, he was one of my best friends. We talked every week. We talked multiple times in the week, but at least every Friday, we would jump on the phone and talk. And I was just thinking about this yesterday, that one of the last conversations we had before, so I guess I'll give the context that he was getting sick. He got COVID, and I was kind of getting sicker. And I'm like, you're getting sicker. I don't know what's going on. He hadn't tested, but I'm like, I think you have COVID. And I
Mm.
was telling him that I was like, Dad, I'm trying not to be upset with you, because I told you should be more careful. Like, of course, I'm like the son that's chastising the father, right?
Mhm.
Like that kind of like guy. And I'm like, I told you should have been more careful. I told you need to be wearing a mask. And I told you need to go get this vaccine. And I grew up in a conservative church, super like anti-vaccine, all of that. Like that's the
And it
environment that I
was
grew
it,
up in.
Seventh-day Adventist?
Seventh-day Adventist, that's
Okay.
correct. And I want to be careful as to say that I don't think the official position of the Seventh-day Adventist Church is to be opposed to vaccines. I think,
Mhm.
in fact, I know for a fact that the official position of the church is a affirmation of the value of vaccines.
Mhm.
But there are people within, but we are a very health conscious kind of like group,
Yes.
right?
Yes, yes,
Like I've
absolutely.
never eaten meat in my life, because we
Wow.
are very, like vegetarian, and
Mhm.
generally we don't drink alcohol.
Mhm.
Generally, I'm not trying to judge
Y'all
anyone.
have great skin. Every Seventh-day Adventist I know has great skin and just yeah, many, many vegetarians, so
Many vegetarians, and I'm one of them. And in any way, so there's this kind of health consciousness. What you put in your body matters, because
Mhm.
your body is the temple of God. And so that can breed, I think, a certain type of conspiratorial kind of like, apprehension to medication, and vaccines are certainly one of kind of a part of that group. Anyway, my dad didn't want to take the vaccine because he'd been told by his pastor that the vaccine was bad, and
Mhm.
for whatever reason. And so all of that to say, my dad said something really interesting to me after I kind of like led into him that day when he was sick, which is such a unfortunate way to spend what would be one of the final conversations I had with my father, when he could speak back to me.
Mm.
But he told me, he said, Garrison, if you try not to be mad, just don't be mad. Just don't be mad.
Mm.
Just don't be mad. Just choose not to be mad. That's okay, son.
Mhm.
And I'll never forget that, because I think it really speaks to his kind of like chill, measured,
Yeah.
even-headed kind of like way of approaching life and the world. But losing my dad really set me on a interesting journey, with regard to my faith. I'd been a chaplain at a university, actually a chaplain at two universities. I've been a pastor in a church for about 4 years, and I had never really had a crisis of faith, but I was always aware of these questions that, like, it feels like Black people everywhere are more Christian than most folks.
Mhm.
And yet, Black people everywhere experience suffering in ways that is unimaginable, and certainly over indexed. It feels like Black people experience suffering and difficulty at a higher rate
Mhm.
than others. And of course, that's all subjective, and we can have our arguments. But certainly, when you measure poverty, and certainly when you measure health outcomes,
Yes.
I think this
Yeah.
connects to my father, a Black man
Mhm.
dying from COVID. Well, the truth is, many of the people, Black people are overrepresented in the
Yes.
deaths from COVID in
Yeah.
America.
I've just
And
gotten through doing multiple episodes of the breakdown on medical racism and just Black health and Black mental health. But please go on.
it's such important work because it's a part of this conversation of those who are people of faith. Well, where is God in all of that,
Hmm.
right? I think the theological term is theodicy.
Hmm.
How can there be a good God with
Hmm.
so many bad things happening in the world? Where is God in all of it? And so I know that you kind of we're transitioning here, and so that was kind of at the heart of this video that I made recently on YouTube, which is this question that's been burning in my heart and mind for a while, and was certainly accelerated when losing my dad and looking at just all that's going on in the world. It was just like, why are Black people still Christian? I've been
Mm.
Christian my whole life. Why are Black people still Christian? It certainly doesn't seem to me that it is served to move us higher in the rankings. It
Mhm.
doesn't seem to have moved us further along in our journey. And then I think a kind of maybe corollary, a secondary kind of question to that is like, does God hate Black people? Given that when I look at the similar outcomes for white people, they just are not the same. When I look
Mhm.
at wealth distribution, when I look at the continent of Africa, when I look at Brazil, it feels like lighter skinned people are just doing better. So
Mhm.
maybe they're God's favorite, and maybe
Mhm.
we are not. And so
Mhm.
those are the questions that I sought to get answers to in that video.
And where did you land, Garrison? I have a million questions, but first of all, where did you land? Did you
Um,
land?
You know, so it took me talk about taking a long time to make a video. It took me a while to make this video because I was going through, I think, grief in itself is a type of deconstruction.
Mhm.
It's a way of taking what you knew, whether it be a person
Yes.
or a relationship or whatever it may be, taking what you knew and it's gone. It
Mhm.
doesn't exist in the same way, and you're kind of like you're growing around that now.
Yes.
You're figuring out, well, what do I look like on the other
Yes.
side of this experience? And that is in many ways what deconstruction is. Taking what you thought you knew as your faith, and now you're figuring out how to kind of grow around the realization that the faith that you had isn't the faith that you really believe, and things are different now. And I
Mhm.
just right, that's the experience. I don't have words to describe, but I hope someone understands that,
Oh, I understand.
like, that's the feeling. I'm so sorry for people listening with
I get it.
headphones, like and so where I landed, came after the last 2.5 years, almost 3 years of being without my dad, which is that life is complicated and people make decisions, and um, I have this kind of hybrid faith now that is one where I think there are many things that are just human decisions. We just choose to exploit each other. And Europeans made the decision to do things that they knew were wrong to Native people and to Black people and to other to other white people. Like
Mhm.
they just made that. Some folks, group just made that decision, and God, in many ways, gives us the freedom to make those decisions. It's a
Mhm.
part of what I believe to be a biblical paradigm of love, if you want to put it in those terms, but also ultimately, if just kind of this idea of freedom of choice, which is a theological perspective, right? Like I think my theological presuppositions are that the world is not determined, and that predestination isn't necessarily kind of imposed upon humanity, that I'm going to do these things because God said I'm going to do these things. I have some choice then, and I have choices to make, and so that's what I believe, and that's where I landed. And so it allows me to still believe in God, one, and it allows me not to necessarily believe that God hates Black people or hates me, but rather that there are folks who have chosen to exploit those around them for whatever reason. And sometimes those people have Black faces just like mine. When I think about the prosperity pimps and preachers who steal millions of dollars from struggling Black people in ghettos
Mhm.
across America, or I think about I don't want to name names, but I have people's names in mind who are being incredibly exploitative, using the church to benefit themselves. Those people are making decisions,
Mhm.
and those are wrong decisions that need to be called out.
I've been having this conversation. I have 4 sisters. So the last few days, we have been in conversation about the death of a singer named Mandisa. And she was a contestant on American Idol. And for whatever reason, I don't know that any of us have been huge fans of hers necessarily, but I think that maybe we see a bit of ourselves in her. I think maybe this is why her death is kind of messing with all of us a little bit.
Mm,
And we're sort of in this process of interrogating, like, hey, what was this all about? And we don't know. I just did a show on depression and suicide within the Black community. So
mm.
one of my recent episodes on KGLH was on that, and I talked about Mandisa in that episode. Are you familiar with her as a singer, at least somewhat?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, we don't know yet what the cause of her death was, but we know that she spent a lot of time talking about depression. She spent a lot of
Mm,
time talking about her struggles with her mental health, which is what caused me to kind of even want to do this episode about Black folks and mental health. And I talked some about suicide and these kinds of things. And as my sisters and I are having these conversations about this, and specifically having conversations about Mandisa, we're asking a lot of questions about
mm,
her relationship with her faith and how we perceive from watching interviews of her, how we have perceived that may have affected her struggle with depression, her being very much a part of this lily white world. It wasn't that she didn't have, because she lived in Nashville. So I know
mm,
a lot of people who knew her. My sister actually knew her, hung out with her a few times. And the kind of world that she occupied. When I went and started watching interviews and kind of watching some of the conferences and things that she was singing at, it was like, oh, whoa, hey, whoa, flashback. It
mhm,
just kind of thrust me back into a world that I left long ago, and a world that I knew, both in terms of my spiritual walk, and in terms of my relationship with whiteness. It sent me back into a world that I very, very consciously made the decision to divest from. And I made the decision to divest from that world, or those worlds, because it was killing my spirit to a
mm,
degree. I felt that it was killing my spirit. And I don't want to superimpose any of that on her. But just kind of listening to some of her conversation and listening to some of the things that that she literally said, and even listening to her talk about her natural hair journey, and just like, hey,
mm,
you guys, I'm gonna, I just want to let you know what I'm doing. This is
mm.
how my hair grows out of my head. I'm thinking, who is she talking to right now?
Who's the audience for that? Yep,
Yes, again,
yep.
audience, because you don't have to have that conversation with Black people. If you know that your primary audience, or at least that a significant portion of your audience, is Black, like, hey, I'm trying a new hairstyle. We're not going to explain why we're not straightening our hair or wearing wigs that make us appear to assimilate more than what we are. So, there are so many triggers in her story for me and for my sisters. And then you get into the faith stuff, and it's just like, oh, I just want to reach out and hug her. And we're just kind of waiting to hear now about a cause of death. But it's just kind of thrown me into a lot of questioning at this point, and my sisters, into a lot of questioning of how we have grappled with that. As you mentioned, deconstruction. This is a whole thing that is, it's a huge thing on TikTok, the deconstruction community. And these are Christians or former Christians who are asking some very fundamental questions about their faith and where they stand with things. And we're going to have to stop it there. That is my conversation with Garrison Hayes about the process of deconstructing within the Black church. Next week will be the final part of this conversation, part 3. We're going to talk about what this means in practical application once you have gone through this process. What does the relationship with your family look like? How does the relationship with your church change? Garrison and I both come from ministry backgrounds. We have very, very strong roots in the church. What does this process look like in practical application? I'm looking forward to sharing part 3 of this conversation with you. Again, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode. Join me on the KJLH Instagram page at Radio Free KJLH, and let's talk about it. Join me again here on KJLH next week, same time, same place. And until then, let's learn to shout.